what are the boundaries of the process, right? What triggers it and where does it end? Because what's in the middle it determines who needs to be in the session, because there are some tasks being done. So who's doing those tasks, right?
Hey everyone, it's John Adams. Welcome back to the Process Lab podcast, the show where we tackle common business process problems and provide insight for operational excellence. Today on the show, we will be discussing process mapping or process flow charting, when to do it, how to do it, and all the benefits. So welcome to the show, Errol Allen. It's a pleasure to have you here. Errol, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into it.
Thank you, John. I'm happy to be here with you as a guest on your show. A little bit about me. I'm a native Houstonian, living in Houston, Texas. I'm a process nut. I'm analytical by nature. I discovered that when I was an operations analyst at one point during my corporate career. I just love processes. Processes make the world go around in my mind, John.
100%. I feel the same. So tell us a little bit about your consulting company and your area of focus.
Well, I'm an operations consultant. Of course, my area of focus are processes, making sure my clients have efficient and effective processes. I also help my clients to establish metrics, just the basic things. But the total focus in my mind is processes. How processes work within your company, what impacts those processes, how do you tie metrics to your processes? I just have fun with processes, John.
So what are some signs that a company should be process mapping or process flow charting? What would be an indication that this is an activity they need to be doing?
When you are experiencing things falling through the cracks, right? Maybe customers aren't receiving their orders on time, or you're getting negative inbound phone calls or negative emails, and there's a pattern to them, right? People are saying the same thing, the same negative issues keep happening, right? So that can be an indicator. In my mind, the question arises, what processes are connected to those issues, right? So in my mind, let's look at the processes, meaning let's map them out to see what it is we're doing to hopefully identify what's creating these issues.
And it seems so logical that there's an outcome of something, like customers are unhappy, and you would say, okay, let's look at the process that got us here. Why don't companies do this routinely? Why isn't it something that they immediately think to do?
Well, usually when issues arise, John, the first thing, I guess, in my own experience, having been in corporate America for a while, people start pointing the finger first, right, at people versus looking at the process. I found that most of the time it's the process, because most people come to work to do a good job. Every once in a while you get a knucklehead that just wants to do what they want to do. But that seems to be, okay, who's responsible for these issues versus what could be responsible, right? It's the process creating the issue. It's the process hindering people from doing things properly. But that's what I see. It's like they point the finger at a person first, right? Versus looking at, could the process be the problem,
Well, I guess that would seem to be faster to people, like everyone knows that Bob works too slowly, or Mary doesn't remember to do whatever, so like it's just an easy, quick fix, it seems like. And what's the problem with immediately pointing a finger at somebody and and trying to address the problem that way?
Well, first of all, you can damage employee morale when you do that, right? Um, you can turn a good employee into a bad employee, or employee that wants to do what's right into somebody who doesn't care because you're pointing the finger at them. So, and a negative um, employee morale is going to impact something else down the line, right? So you don't want to do that first. And then also, John, one thing that I find is a lot of times companies don't train their people properly, right? Because they have nothing to use as a tool to train them with.
Hmm.
So then we got to hold people accountable for without training them properly. It's like you can't do that. That's not fair. And that's another reason to have processes in place is you can use them as a training tool.
And I guess the other problem is even if you figure out who to blame, you probably still have a broken process that's not being addressed. So,
Right, 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 right.
Okay, so you've convinced the company or the operations person to process a map or process flow chart. Well, I guess what does that look like? What is that? What's involved in that? How much time do they need to invest in that? And yeah, what does it look like?
How much time do they need to invest in mapping the process?
So if you tell somebody, okay, we need you to map, they're going to be like, ugh, I just want to take care of this by telling Bob he's got to work harder, or whatever. So like, you're going to say, no, patience, let's get this right.
Mhm.
And they're going to say, okay, well, when are we going to have this process flow charted or mapped?
Well, we're going to sit down in a session first, right? And depending on the process, it could take an hour or two to map it out properly, right? But the main thing we need to do is to make sure we have the right people in the mapping session, right? So the question would become who needs to be in this session, right? And then the next question is how do we determine that, right?
Okay.
So I always start with what are the boundaries of the process, right? What triggers it and where does it end? Because what's in the middle it determines who needs to be in the session because there's some tasks being done. So who's doing those tasks, right? And so we need the people that are doing the work in the process. We need the people that are impacted by the process, meaning there could be people that when this process ends, it's handed off to somebody or going somewhere else, right? So we need them in there too. And then we need the person that feeds the process because a lot of times one process triggers another. So somebody's feeding this process. So we want them in there too to make sure we um, map it properly. Because if you're missing any one of those groups of people, you're going to miss something, and then you're going to be doing it over again. And it's already tedious, right? And we already have some time we're dealing with, so we don't want to have to do it again. So we want to make sure we have the right people in the session.
And what do you say if, let's say, you're talking to the COO or somebody who says, "Oh, I know what everyone does. I know what all these people do. I could just tell you."
I'm going to say no, we're not doing it that way. Um, what there may have been a point where maybe you did some of the work within the process. I appreciate that. However, we want current knowledge of what's going on because if we don't include those people, Mr. and Miss COO, we're going to have an issue. We're going to miss something and they're going to hate you because now here's a process that you created, we mapped out based on your knowledge and without checking with them, and they're not going to like that. So we'll be doing it again. And now you'll have trouble from the beginning because now you want to bring them in and they're not going to like you. So you're going to have trouble if we just do it with your knowledge. We're going to have all that trouble to deal with down the line.
And once while having the process map or while you're mapping, are there any challenges to mapping that people should be aware of? Besides having the big one, having the right people in the room, knowing when it begins and ends. Are there any other challenges while you're mapping that people either, I don't know, I'll let you answer.
Sometimes, John, there's people, you probably know this already. There's people, they want to do things their way, right? Even if it means it's not the best way for other people involved in the process. So at the beginning, we have to start with, hey, we're going to create the best process that's good for everybody, right? That's what I like to do. So that when you have those challenges, if somebody just wants to do what they want to do, even when it makes no sense, we can always go back to, okay, remember, we said we want to create the best process that's good for everybody. You can always go back to that, right? So that's how I've learned to overcome, you know, it happens where somebody just wants to do what they want to do. It happens. So I believe in setting that up in the beginning. We're going to do what's best for everybody, right?
So that way people participate and share their knowledge. Do you have any stories of scenarios where you had to convince people to process map and then they discovered something that they didn't expect, something very beneficial to them?
John, this has been a few years ago now, but one in particular, there was one of my clients, they're two of my best buddies now. They had a residential property management company, and we were going to map out a process that involved the property managers, right? So I'm sitting between two property managers. They do the same thing. And I asked them, okay, what's the trigger? They both said the same thing, meaning what starts the process. And I said, and then what happens? And they said two different things. And I'm like, wait, y'all
Right
do
off the bat.
yes. I'm like, wait, y'all do the same thing. Y'all do the same job, right? And they both said yes. So the one sitting on my right, she looked around me and asked the one on my left, hey, why is that your next step? And she started to explain, right? And then she said, well, the one on my right said, well, that makes sense. And I said, okay, what's the best next step, right? So then that's when the two partners realize, wow, where else is this happening that, we're inconsistent in how we do things, right? If this person is doing it this way, this person is doing it that way, why? Why? So that's one that comes to mind right away,
Yeah. And that also brings to mind, is there a certain size company where they don't have to worry about process mapping or flow charting, or like if it's a smaller company or mid-size, or like who benefits from this?
Everybody, John. In my mind, when you're smaller, that's the perfect time to do it, right? Because the goal with a small company is usually to grow, right? And when you start growing, you're starting to add more people, right? So now you have something to utilize to train them with. And another benefit when you're small is usually processes reside in somebody's head, right? And your people are wearing multiple hats. So you need to get all of that knowledge out of people's head when you're small, so that when you start to grow, you're not trying to do it then in the midst of growth. Now, you may have to tweak them as you grow, right? Because growth brings about different ways of doing things, but you won't have to start at the beginning. You can just tweak now. So I say small is the perfect time to do it.
And so now we hit, let's fast forward, unless we can come back to it, but we have the map. Now, what can we do with that? What do we get out of it?
Ooh, okay. The map in my mind is just the what. What steps are we taking to get this process done, right? So do we have all of the right steps? Do we have good handoffs, right? Make sure we have all of that in the process. Now you can go back to the map and look at a particular step and say, how do we do that step? Now you're looking for the how steps on the map. How do we do that step? And in my mind, that's where you create your documentation, right? Somebody can, if a person is doing this particular step, how are they getting it done? Are they in the company's software that the company uses? So now you can video exactly how they do it. They can narrate as they're doing it. You just go through the map and find all of the how steps, right? And create all of this knowledge of how to do these tasks and create a library of how to do tasks, right? Now you have a library of training tools. You bring somebody in, here's your role, here are your tasks. They can just go to that library and learn how to do their tasks. So that's another bang in doing the map, right? In addition to, are we doing all the right steps? Is it efficient? Is it effective? And now let's look at for the how steps so we can create, documentation. Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah. So it sounds like there's two benefits, or two easy benefits, is being able to identify opportunities to improve the process, make it more efficient, or as in the case with your two real estate managers, I think you said, property managers, they can also standardize, amongst them. So the benefit there. But then now they have training material. So somebody goes on vacation or somebody leaves, it's not like everything stops. Like you have all this institutional knowledge, and you, once they've mapped a process, do you then suggest, how do you build a culture of doing this, or an approach of a company looking to do this, instead of it just being like a one-time fix for a specific problem?
Right. Well, the goal is always to look at all of the processes, right? That's the goal. A good way to get people to be on board is to start with processes that are connected to issues, right? So we're having these issues. What processes are connected to these issues? Let's look at these processes and make whatever tweaks we need to make so those issues go away, right? So you get an instant bang, right? And people, now you can get, you get people, okay, let's do more, let's do more. So I like to start with processes that are connected to problems and issues to get people to want to do more.
And then see the benefit of it. When they have these, let's say they have a lot of processes mapped, what happens over time to these process maps or process flow charts? Do they, would you recommend people keep going back to them, or do you have to redo them every now and then, or how does that look?
An easy thing to do, John, is, a lot of companies have team meetings, right? So during the team meeting, you can ask one question. There's one, whether it's at the beginning or the end, one question, or in the middle. Are your processes still working for you, right? And if somebody has a suggestion, hey, I think we can make this better if we, so now you can explore it, right? And get everybody back together so that you make the right tweaks, you don't negatively impact somebody, right? That's one way to do it. Just asking that question, are your processes still working for you? And then, or you can look every 6 months, right? Let's review our processes to make sure they're still as efficient and effective as they can be, right? Or if you're deciding, you're changing strategy a little bit. So ask the question, what processes are connected to that change in strategy? Because something is going to be impacted, right? Now, if your marketing team, they got stuff going, right? So now you're getting a whole lot of leads and you're converting a lot of those leads, well, that's going to put pressures somewhere, right? So you have to ask yourself, okay, we're going to do this. Now we're getting all these leads. What's impacted by that? Now you got to process all that stuff, right? Especially the lead converts to a customer, new client. Operations has to deal with that, So you have that. Are we ready for that? What does that mean we're going to need to do? Where can we tweak our processes to handle that expected volume? Does that make sense?
100%.
Okay.
And that sounds all sounds very, very helpful. What other things can you do with process mapping or thinking, because you're thinking in terms of process, in terms of a process to help companies? So like there's the process mapping, and that's a certain sequence.
Mm-hmm.
Is it always based on the process map and then things happen from there, or is there anything else? And this, I don't have something in mind. So
okay, so now you've created your map, right? So do you want to connect a metric goal to that process? Right? What should that goal be, right? To make sure the process is running the way it should run to meet that goal, right? So can you connect a metric? You hear people talking about KPIs, right? Key performance indicator. Can you connect a key performance indicator to that process, right? Or does that process impact one of your current KPIs, right? Usually they do somewhere. You look at your KPIs and there's a process that impacts the ability to meet that KPI goal, right?
So can you give an example for everyone?
Just thinking about going back to that client, John.
Mm-hmm.
If you get a new management client, what's your goal for having that new management client and whatever properties that are being managed, having them onboarded into your system, right? Because you can't do anything without them being onboarded. So what's your metric goal for, we get a new client, it should take us 3 days to onboard them, right? So if that's not happening, it's very easy to go, okay, what's our onboarding process, right? For onboarding a new management client and onboarding the new management client's properties. What do those processes look like? If that goal is not being met, let's look at what we're doing. So you go back to your map, right? What are we doing to that doesn't allow us to meet that goal, right? Then you might determine, okay, that's not a good goal, right? Or you might determine, okay, we can do this different, or we can do that different. We can make sure that management client gives us all the information we need up front, so we're not going back, looping back, having to ask for stuff, right? We can make sure the salespeople, whoever sold that new client, we can make sure they're getting everything that the onboarding person needs to onboard that client in a timely manner.
I love this example because a lot of times onboarding processes, there isn't an expectation necessarily from a client that they're going to be onboarded within whatever amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
But there could be a problem with it. Like the client feels like you've asked them 52 times for the same document, like you just said.
Mm-hmm.
But so you can imagine the team gets together, they map the process and they figure out, okay, here's how we can make this better.
Mm-hmm.
But you're suggesting, and I love the suggestion, that they should still put a KPI, they should still put a metric on it, no
Mm-hmm.
matter what. Because if you don't have the metric, you don't know if you're getting better, if you're getting worse. Nobody knows what they should be working toward or anything like that. So even if nobody's asking for this metric, every process should have a metric associated with it.
I think so, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I love that suggestion.
Yeah, I think so. And then you have the handoffs in that process, right? From sales to operations, right? If that handoff is not good, you're going to have a lot of loop back, right? The first question in my mind, you get that information from the salesperson. So now you look at it. Do I have everything I need to onboard this new management client and their properties, right? If the answer is yes, you just keep rolling, right? If the answer is no, now you're looping back, to that salesperson. Hey, you didn't give me, whatever. So everything slows down. Then the phone starts ringing from that new client. Hey, what's going on, right? So I'm thinking, you have to have that partnership, right? Sales, this is your internal customer, this onboarding person. That's your internal customer. Here's what they need from you. Here's this checklist so that you can remember what to give them, right? Because see, this is what happens when you give this to them. Your brand new client that you just sold, now they can be onboarded very, very quickly, right? But if you don't give them what they need, then your new management client is going to be blowing your phone up, wondering what's going on. So it's fun,
Yeah.
John.
But I love the example you just gave about the looping back, because that's another thing that people sometimes don't realize about process mapping or process flow charting, is that even if you're not the expert in the room on process mapping, everyone in the room can see, oh, wow, there's a loop here. And it just keeps going around and around. So like people kind of start even identifying themselves that, hey, this doesn't make sense. Like you see it, so
yeah.
That's just one example, but it's there's a lot like it. So
yes, that's the great thing about process mapping. It's a visual, right? And like you said, people can easily see, well, that doesn't make sense, and then what percentage? I like percentages, John. What percentage of the time do you find yourself in that loop, right? Now, if it's a low percentage, 2%, 3%, yeah, you might be able to live with that, right? When we start getting double digits, 10%, 15%, I've even heard people say, well, that happens 50% of the time. And I'm like, what? Is that acceptable? Like, what can we do to reduce that or even eliminate it, right? So I don't know, man.
Yeah. Well, I find a lot of times people say, okay, then we do this, then this, and this. And then if you ask, well, does it always happen like that? They say, oh, no, doesn't always happen. It's like sometimes you have to ask, because people just say they haven't imagined in their minds, the process goes like, straight line.
Yeah.
You ask, like, does it always happen? Then it's like, oh, no. Then you start seeing the percentages, go all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fun for me, man. I know, for a lot of people, it's tedious, and their eyes roll up in the back of their head. But I try to make it fun, and where people can hang in there, right? Just hang in there to see, okay, here's what we accomplished by mapping this process out. Can y'all see what we accomplished? I always ask, what did we accomplish in mapping this out? And I let them tell me, right? I already see it, right? But I just let them talk. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. What's next? I love to hear which one gonna work on next, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I think people think it's tedious just when they're thinking about having to do it, maybe. But I've never seen a group do it and then think, oh, this doesn't make sense. Why are we doing this? Once they're in it, it gives people a chance to be heard in an effective way, not just like, oh, this is bad and this is bad. No, like, let me show you, so it's, but maybe I'm also a process nerd. So, so maybe I'm the wrong person to say whether it's exciting, but I do think it's.
But you're right though, John. Usually when you do one, most people like, hey, let's go, let's do another one. Let's do another one, especially when it impacts them. Right, we got the right people in the room. It's going to positively impact them, especially when you can tweak something that's going to make the situation better for them. Most people want to keep going. It's just getting them to do the first one.
Yeah. So as we come to the end of the show, any final thoughts, call to action, or anything that you want to tell the audience to have in mind about process flow charting, or the need to do it, or anything like that?
Do it, right? The long-term benefits, right, is what I get people to pay attention to. What are the long-term benefits of mapping your processes, right? What are the immediate benefits and what are the long-term benefits? How does it impact your employee morale and your customer satisfaction? How is all of that impacted, right? Think about that and do it, right? And if you need help, there's guys like us around, John, that can help people, right?
Excellent. And but definitely before we close, why don't you just, and it'll be on in the link in the podcast, but why don't you tell people how to reach you?
You can reach me through my website, documentyourprocesses.com, or via email, errol@errolallenconsulting.com, or even my phone, 281-467-9189. I'm always ready to talk about processing, man. It's a lot of fun for me. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you, Errol. Pleasure speaking to you. It's nice to see a fellow tribe member, of the process world. And to our audience, please let us know any process challenges you've had or benefits that you've seen to process mapping. And if you like the content, please subscribe and share the episode with others. Until next time, thank you, everyone.